I'm just going to try. Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I've got the pleasure and privilege of having Professor Peter Kuznick with me today. Peter is Professor of History at the prestigious American University in Washington, D.C. He's written many, author of many books, particularly focused on the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings in 1945. And Professor Kuznick has been always very critical about the deployment of those weapons of mass destruction. Um, he's probably more well known for a book that he co-authored with the American film director Oliver Stone. The title of that being "The Untold History of the United States." I'm going to uh, try to share a little image of that book with you. I hope you can see it. There's the book, the title, "The Untold History of the United States," Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick, published about 12 years ago. Um,
Actually, Finian, can I interrupt you on 2 points? One, we put out a new edition in 2019 that takes it through the beginning of the Trump administration. So I'd like readers to get that one instead. The original one was about 750 pages. The new one is more than 900 pages. So it's more comprehensive, looks at Obama and Trump also,
hmm,
takes it up closer to the present. And let me make one other quick point. Oliver called me yesterday after rewatching our interview with Tucker Carlson. And Oliver said, Peter, you keep on bringing up our book, but you don't mention our documentary film series. And Oliver, of course, takes great pride in that. And that was a 12-hour, 12-part documentary film series that aired on Showtime in the United States and then Netflix and then everywhere. But it aired all over the world
yeah,
and is terrific. It combines my skill as a historian with Oliver's brilliance as a director. So I urge people to watch that as well as to read the 2019 edition of the book.
yeah. Thanks, Peter, for that update. Thanks a lot. I wonder if I can call up your very illustrious bio here from the American University. I was looking at it earlier on, just the decades of work that you've done on the Nagasaki, the atomic bombings, but also the Cold War. Here's
Yeah,
Peter's bio.
this,
Uh,
this
I,
is one that I haven't updated for a decade, including the photos. That's
yeah.
earlier photos, you could tell.
Uh,
Um,
well, you
but
haven't changed much, don't worry. I mean, the reader, anybody tuning in can see this is a great, beautiful CV of scholarly work covering the Cold War and American foreign policy. The untold history of the United States gives could I say, an iconoclastic view of American mythology. I've yet to read the book in detail myself, but the synopsis sounds fascinating. I'm looking forward to reading it. So, anybody wishing to check out Professor Kuznick's full bio, please go to the American University of Washington, D.C. I hope to mention the university leader, Peter, in our interview, because that university is famous for a milestone, a seminal speech by Professor John F. Kennedy in June 1963, just a few months before his assassination, in which it was a fantastic speech appealing for the end of the Cold War and disarmament, issues that are very close to your heart and a lot of people's hearts. And that speech by JFK in June 1963 in the American University is seen by many as a seminal, historically important speech. Tragically, shamefully, a few months later, he was assassinated. But we shall maybe mention that later. I'll just go back to our main screen, Peter. Now, the subject for today, Professor Kusnik, is we've got a new administration now, Donald Trump. inaugurated yesterday, 20th of January. Um, he's talking right away about bringing the end of the conflict in Ukraine. He has been talking about that several times during his election campaign. Some would say a little bit with bravado, boasting, saying that he would end it in 24 hours. Nevertheless, the the intent is there to end this conflict, urgently by President Trump. What do you see as the prospects for such an initiative from the Trump administration?
Well, let me first say that I would much rather have the John F. Kennedy of 1963 ending the war in Ukraine than the Donald Trump of 2025. A very, very different perspective on the world. If you look at Kennedy's speech, it's a model not only of statesmanship and of brilliant insight into the global situation, but of uh, compassion for humanity. And uh, Kennedy's uh, change after the Cuban Missile Crisis that last year allowed him to embrace humanity, as he says, not a Pax Americana, but a global change that's in the interests of people everywhere. Now, Trump sometimes can overlap with some of Kennedy's progressive foreign policy visions, but it's not out of a basic love of humanity and wanting a peaceful and prosperous world. It's out of more of an isolationist framework. We might get to the same goal, but I think that the motivation is very different. Kennedy would never have done the things or said the things that Trump did yesterday. If you look at overall what it is a model of meanness, a model of ugliness, it's not just Musk with his fascist salute. It's Trump does not care about causing pain to people. So I despise what he is doing on the domestic front, where he's bringing back all the ugliest, worst tendencies in American life, the most racist, the most white supremacist, the most anti-immigrant, the most sexist. But I agree with you that on the global stage, we've got to differentiate because in some ways his instincts are more positive given what the world requires now than they are on the domestic front. So when
Yeah,
you talk about Ukraine,
I, I
uh,
saw I saw a line in the speech, Peter. Sorry to cut in on you, but I saw a quote here: "Our power will stop all wars and bring a new spirit of unity to a world that has been angry, violent, and totally unpredictable." One could say that a lot of that unpredictability and violence has been brought upon by United States foreign policy over the decades, but he does seem to. He does seem to be reaching out for some kind of like peaceful coexistence with Russia and China. And just to get back to the Ukraine scenario, I mean,
Vinny, let me interrupt you again.
okay,
Uh, but because he says in his inaugural address that he wants to be a peacemaker, but then he says that look at how Panama is mistreating us. And it was such a mistake to give away the Panama Canal. It says, and now they're opening it up and China's running it. And they're charging the U.S. exorbitant rates, and we're going to take it back. How do you be a peacemaker and you take back the Panama Canal? He also talks about William McKinley. What is McKinley known for? Trump is extolling him. McKinley was one of the first proponents of U.S. imperialism and colonialism. He was involved with the Spanish-American War. He invaded the Philippines. We're talking about Trump, and that's the thing that you have to understand about Trump. He's on all sides of all issues. He has very little knowledge and no firm belief, no firm ideology, which is why he's transactional, which is why he does want to make a deal with China, which is good. We should. When it comes to Ukraine, he was very critical yesterday in his comments about Putin. He didn't mention Ukraine in his inaugural address, but afterwards in his press conference, he talked about the way the invasion is destroying Russia, and and that Putin has got to recognize that. So when we get to this question that you're asking about Ukraine, Trump's instincts much are more, from my standpoint, more positive and more hopeful.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
Trump has said, first he said he's going to end the war within the first 24 hours. Now his chief advisors say, well, hopefully we can get a settlement within 6 months. And which I've been calling when I was opposed to the invasion from the beginning, but I was more opposed to US policy and NATO expansion, which
Mhm.
Oliver and I decried back in all of our work, and so I like the Lula Xi Jinping 12-point peace plan, in which they say point number one, every country has to respect every other country's sovereignty, which is implicitly a criticism of the Russian invasion. Point number two, no country's national security should be achieved at the expense of another country's national security, which is a critique of the US and NATO and what's going on with Ukraine. So it could have been prevented and it should have been prevented. We knew that, and Putin had been saying for years, even Yeltsin had been criticizing the NATO expansion. And then Putin threw down the gauntlet in 2007, and the U.S. completely ignored it. And in 2008, George W. Bush says he wants to fast track Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, and that was going far beyond anything that Putin could tolerate. And the Americans understand that. We almost went to World War III over the Russians, the Soviets putting nuclear weapons into Cuba. The United
Mhm.
States would not tolerate uh, Russia or China having bases in Mexico or Canada. So the United States, the should have been avoided in the first place, and then the Maidan uprising and the role of Biden and Victoria Nuland and other U.S. policymakers in goading that and facilitating that, and what happened with Yanukovych. I mean, this is a situation, it's a tragic situation that should have and could have been avoided. And on some level, Trump gets that. Uh,
Mhm.
and Trump will put pressure on Zelensky because if the U.S. cuts off its arms and financial support, you might have Starmer and Baerbock and some of the others saying they're going to try to make it up, but they're not going to be able to. We already see the pressure on the European economies, and we see the dissent within Europe over the continuing the slaughter. Because what people understand is that 6 months from now, a year from now, Ukraine's going to be in a worse position. Russia will have taken more territory. There'll be hundreds of thousands more Ukrainians and Russians dead, more of the economies of both countries destroyed. And so, I mean, there is no positive outcome for the Ukrainians because they are outgunned, they're outmanned, they're outmaneuvered, and there's no way they're going to win this and expel the Russians from the territory that Russia's taken. So, uh,
Can I just cut in?
please, please.
How concerned were you that the way the conflict, the trajectory of the conflict in Ukraine was going with under the Biden administration and NATO, that it was leading to World War III? I mean, Biden had given clearance for long-range missile attacks into Russia, deep into Russia. It was just going provocation after provocation. Were you concerned that to continue along that dynamic was leading to World War III, and as you've spent your life being concerned about nuclear to avoid nuclear war?
Uh, yes, I've been inveighing against all of these new weapon systems. And even Biden gets it for a moment, but that's as long as he can focus. So initially, when there's pressure to introduce every new weapon system, whether it's the HIMARS or the F-16s or the attack missiles, or even before that, Biden says, I'm not going to do it because it's too provocative, and we don't want to put Russia in a position where they're going to respond with tactical nuclear weapons or start World War III. And
Mm.
then he always caves in each time.
Yeah.
And made it so clear with that the crossing red lines with the attack and missiles, which he'd done before with the F-16s. The U.S. view is perverse, but this is the logic. And it's that two things that are totally terrible and dangerous. One is the assumption that if Russia somehow wins in Ukraine, then Putin's got these voracious appetites and is going to go after one European country after another. Total nonsense. Look at how hard it's been for Russia to win in Ukraine. And so they're going to take on NATO. Putin is not insane. And
Well, Peter, would you say that Trump, to his credit, he doesn't buy into that kind of narrative. He doesn't have this obsession that the Biden administration seemed to have about, this caricature of Putin being some sort of like reincarnation of Hitler. Trump doesn't buy into that. He seems to be more realistic about the dangers of a third world war, a nuclear conflagration, escalating. So on those points alone, one would like to think that this new administration, for all its warts and faults and contradictions, that there is more of a prospect for peace under this Trump administration.
there's more of a prospect for peace, absolutely. But now there are several dangers involved in that. One, if you look at the people around Trump, they don't share that vision for the world. You've got Marco Rubio and Mike Walls, and Sebastian Gorka, Pete Hegseth. These are America firsters, but they're also American exceptionalists, and they
Mhm.
also support American empire. And they're China hawks, they're Russia hawks, they're Iran hawks. One of the dangers is that Trump was going to end the war in Ukraine so he could focus instead on Iran and China as he did during his first term. We're
Mhm.
seeing some positive indications that that might not be the case. And I welcome that if that's not the case, and especially toward China. You look during the campaign, and Trump's bashing China and talking about 60% tariffs on all Chinese imports and 100% on electrical vehicles. And he called for the ban on TikTok. But then he reverses himself. That's the thing about Trump that we have to be careful about, positive and negative, that he's got no fixed beliefs and he can take the opposite side in a minute. And so he invited Xi Jinping to the inauguration. He didn't come, but Han Zheng, the vice president, did come. He reverses himself on the TikTok ban. He says that the first trip he wants to take overseas is going to be to China. So he's conciliating. But if you listen to Marco Rubio's testimony and
Mm.
other people, these are China hawks. And but Musk has economic ties to China, and Musk has always pushed for a more friendly relation to China. So who's going to have his ear? Hegseth, Rubio, Sebastian Gorka, these people, Mike Walls, or is it going to be Elon Musk? In this case, I vote for Musk because he's more reasonable. But when we get to the thing about Trump versus Biden and the threat of nuclear war, so Biden kept on giving all these weapon systems, including the ATACMs. And how did Russia respond to the getting hit with the U.S. ATACMs? They, first of all, respond with the Oreshnik missiles, and the Oreshniks, as you know, go Mach 11, 11 times the speed of sound, hypersonic. As H.R. McMaster, Trump's former national security advisor, said, the United States will probably not have anti-ballistic missile systems that can deal with the Oreshniks for 15 years. So where the United States has been building up, massively, Russia has responded strategically, not deal trying to match the United States quantitatively, but trying to get ahead of the United States qualitatively. And the Oreshnik represents that. and their advances in hypersonics represent that. And their advances in other areas do as well. The underwater drone that they've got that can take out any coastal city. And so, but we get back to Kennedy. One of the things that Kennedy said in that commencement address is to put a nuclear armed foe in a position where it either has to suffer humiliating defeat or uh, or use nuclear weapons is either a colossal failure of statesmanship or a collective death wish on the part of the human species. Kennedy got it. Biden didn't get it, and or whoever was calling the shots for Biden, we don't really know
Yeah.
by the end of his presidency. So
Mm.
yes, in that sense, Trump is a breath of fresh air, and maybe, hopefully, will do the right thing when it comes to Ukraine and put pressure on Zelensky to do what so many of the Ukrainian people want. And you look at the polling in Ukraine, and the majority of Ukrainians now say they would trade land for peace. The old statement that we used to have in the Middle East, that they're so tired after 3 years of war that they're going to uh, that they would welcome a peace settlement. But Zelensky has certainly not abided by that.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, a good summary there, Professor Kuznick. You think you think on the margin that there is a chance that we could have some kind of deal in Ukraine, despite I understand your caveats about Trump's nature and his the people that surround him and his kind of fickle view of the world, but the prospects of a peace deal in Ukraine are substantially better now than under Biden.
So much better.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
much better. But Finian, again, my concern is if things don't work out the way Trump wants, he can be so rash, impulsive, and unpredictable. That Biden at least talked about the need to avoid World War III and nuclear war, and on some level, at least earlier, seemed to comprehend it.
Mhm.
His actions betrayed it, obviously. Trump, when I look and I give talks about his nuclear policy during his first term in office, it worries me. I know he said things recently criticizing Biden for putting us in a position where nuclear war was a risk. And I like that. And I know in Trump's earlier career, before he entered politics, he was very critical of the nuclear arms race and the threat of nuclear war. But I
Mhm.
also know that Trump pulled the United States out of the INF Treaty. He pulled the United States out of the Open Skies Treaty. He refused to extend the New START Treaty. And so Trump dismantled the nuclear architecture, the arms control architecture that made the world at least a little bit safer.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and, and when he was told in that meeting about how much the arms nuclear arsenal for the United States and the Russians had declined since the 1986 peak of 70,000, then down to 14,000, he said, "Well, we should increase America's nuclear arsenal tenfold." It was at that point that Rex Tillerson called him a fucking moron, and uh, you so, yes, I agree with you that there is more hope right now under Trump, but I worry that this guy is so mercurial, so impulsive that,
Mhm.
if it wasn't for his beautiful golf courses, under other circumstances, he could put us in a more dangerous position. But right now, I think that it's moving internationally in a more peaceful direction.
Mm. That was the word I was thinking of just as you were speaking, mercurial. And I think it sums up Trump very well, mercurial. And I've just actually got an image of JFK delivering that speech
Yeah, I love it.
at the University, the American University of Washington, D.C. on the 10th of June, 1963. It was a beautiful speech. It was really well crafted by Ted Sorensen, I think. And
Actually, Finian, can I add something to that? What really happened was that Norman Cousins, the editor of Saturday Review, went to Moscow twice to meet with Khrushchev. And Khrushchev was honest with him. And he said, if uh, if peace fails and the nuclear bombs start to fall, what difference will it make if we're capitalists or communists, Christians or atheists or Jews or Muslim? What difference will it make? Who will be left to tell us apart? So it
Mm,
was really Khrushchev's initiative.
right.
Kennedy more slowly, but Kennedy said to Norman Cousins for the second time, convey to Khrushchev the sincerity of my feelings and that I know that we're both in the same position, surrounded by these war hawks. You know,
Mhm.
our options are limited. And Norman Cousins came back to Kennedy, and Kennedy said, "Well, what can I do to show him the sincerity of my views?" And Norman Cousins said, "Give a speech that talks about ending the Cold War and the need for peace and nuclear abolition." And so Norman Cousins gave Kennedy the first draft. Then Sorensen revised it. But the amazing thing is they did not let the CIA, the Pentagon, the State
Mm,
Department touch it,
yeah.
right? That's why it was I think the most important presidential address of the 20th century and the most important statement. Again, he says, It's so troubling that we have such negative feelings about the Russian people and they
Mhm.
about us. And we've
Yeah.
got to we've got to bridge those gaps and we've got to develop friendly relations." And he said, if we can't immediately resolve our differences, let's at least make the world safe for diversity.
Mm.
I
Some
mean,
might
where do you hear that anymore?
some might say, Peter, that that could have been JFK's signed his own death warrant there on that speech. The enemies in the deep state would have it would reached an intolerable threshold from their point of view of him threatening their deep interests. That should be another interview. But just to kind of contrast again, Professor Kuznick, you say that the Trump lacks that depth of historical awareness that JFK had in his speech. You're saying that JFK's speech was a truly profound uh, overture for peace, whereas Trump's a little bit superficial, mercurial, and it's um, it's a dicey prospect. It's not one of substance and kind of you know
But
any profound appreciation of the the the
can,
need
can
for global security and indivisible security that you began talking about earlier on.
yeah, I think there's a huge difference, but Biden was so disappointing on every front. Domestically, he did okay, and if some of the things he did were positive. But on the foreign policy, Biden came into office surrounded by 18 top advisors from the Center for New American Security. These are the hawks, the super hawks, mostly China hawks, but also Russia hawks. And their goal was to go after China from the beginning under Biden, but Ukraine got in the way, and then Gaza got in the way, and so their focus was more divided. Uh, and Biden was taken over, but he's an old cold warrior. This is not inconsistent with who Biden had always been. And he created such a dangerous world. We were talking before about the risk of nuclear war. We're closer under Biden than we've been at any time, certainly since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and maybe even more dangerous than that.
Yeah.
So, and now under Trump, we've taken a step back. And, and
Yeah.
I and I and I'm one thing we should do everything we can to encourage him to pursue peace in that way. And if it means suffering a fool like Elon Musk and these billionaires and trillionaires or almost trillionaires and oligarchs, I hate that. Biden was correct when he said we're becoming an oligarchy, but we're also becoming a plutocracy. And that's not it. I mean, we live in a world in which the richest, probably six people, have more wealth than the poorest four billion people. mean, the disparities of this world are so incongruous, so unthinkable, uh, and they're going to get worse because Trump wants to have new tax policies that are going to even lessen the taxes on the super wealthy even more. So they're going to make out like bandits in this administration. But at least if we don't end life on the planet, then I have the possibility someday, it might not be for hundreds of thousands of years, but of creating a better kind of world. And that's what I'm hoping for. So the first task, in my view, before us is prevent nuclear war. The second task is to have ease the conflicts. The other thing that, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Khrushchev wrote Kennedy a brilliant letter on October 30th, in which he said, "From evil, some good must come." This is right after the Cuban Missile Crisis ended. From evil, some good must come. Our people have both felt the flaming fires of nuclear war. What we,
Mm,
excuse me, I got bronchitis. What we need to do now is remove every conflict between us that can cause a new crisis. And Kennedy and Khrushchev set out to do that last year of
mm,
Kennedy's life and that last period of before Khrushchev got toppled in 64, they would have created a new world.
mm.
Uh,
You,
can Trump and Putin do that?
you,
I- I've been calling, I've been calling it in my talks and interviews for a new summit. I'm giving a talk in Russia that I'm recording about Yalta in 1945 and how there was a global summit and that tried to create a more peaceful world. It didn't work for reasons we could talk about,
well,
but I think we need a new summit. We need excuse me, Trump to sit down with Putin and Xi Jinping and Modi, maybe Lula and a couple others,
mm,
and talk about how we change the direction we've been taking.
yeah. Peter, I'm conscious of your voice giving up on you. And sorry, thanks very much for joining us in your kind of fragile kind of condition. But Peter, okay, let me just finish this off. What are you looking for? You're looking for an international summit, a very new forum, a brave new step by
Yeah.
the leaders like Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping, other people, to talk about a new détente global. I mean, we're talking about just getting back to the UN Charter, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And we've had this vision so many times. It's not like it's never been. It's not just Kennedy and Khrushchev. Even Reagan and Gorbachev almost eliminated nuclear weapons at Reykjavik. If if Reagan had only agreed to limit testing of his Star Wars to the laboratory for 10 years, it had barely entered the laboratory at that point. And we would have eliminated nuclear weapons. In 53, Eisenhower, right after Stalin's death, when the Soviet leaders reached out to the United States to end the Cold War. At that point, in March of 53, Eisenhower responds with a speech in which he says that every dollar we spend on missiles and bombs and fighter planes is a theft from the people in our countries. The money should be going to new school buildings, new roads, new bridges,
Mm,
health care, the things that we need. And what is the first thing that Trump does when he gets into office? He cancels all of the efforts to curb global warming. He pulls the United States out of the Paris Peace Accords. I mean, instead of that positive vision of how we can work together in the interest of humanity,
mm.
he's got,
Yeah.
he's just creating more divisions and taking us backward in some ways. But at least he understands that war is not the answer, except
Yeah.
for except for Panama and Greenland and maybe Canada and
Yeah.
Mexico. But he
Yeah.
says overseas wars are not the answer.
Do you think, Peter, this is one last question. Do you think Trump has got the strength of character or his own political determination um, to confront those that within his cabinet or the deep state who would want him to not follow his instincts of looking for a peaceful detente with Putin.
I think he's got the strength to do that. I would not call it, in Trump's case, the strength of character. I think when it comes to character, he's greatly deficient. But I think when it comes to strength, he's got a lot of strength. It's more the strength of the bully. It's more the strength of the strong man. It's more the strength of the autocrat than it is the strength of the Democrat, the peace-loving person, the person with a little bit of kindness. That's not, but he does have strength. And I think if people defy him, he's ready to crush them. And I don't think that the people around him have much strength. The Marco Rubios, the way Trump mocked Rubio during the 2016 campaign, and Rubio comes back and kisses his feet. When I think about presidents, I think that in some ways Trump is like U.S. President Andrew Johnson, who was Lincoln's vice president. He was a Southern Democrat, and he was opposed to the Confederacy, not because he didn't like slavery. He said slavery is okay. I just wish everybody had slaves. They had to go around more. But he hated the planter class, the aristocracy of the South, because he came from a poor working class background. So what he did was he made them come to him individually and beg for pardons after the Civil War before he would restore their rights. And I think Trump likes having these people come and grovel to him too. So Trump will crush people who resist him. But I've also been told by Trump insiders that he tends to listen to the last person in the room, that he's
Peter,
easily
Peter,
persuaded.
I'm sorry. I don't want you to be cut off mid-sentence. I just want to thank you so much. We've got a few seconds left. I just want to thank you so much for joining me, considering too you're suffering from bronchitis. I wish you well. Happy New Year. I hope you get better soon. And thanks very much, Peter.
Thank you, Finney, and I've always loved your work, and it's great to talk to you today.